not going to be a failure what I'm going to tell you, but I have to welcome President Woodrow Wilson to another medical event in our university. And in order to prove I was not lying, I kindly invited and asked President Woodrow Wilson to say hello to our colleagues to the 8th floor before to come here and to have the event. I would like to thank the American Embassy because it was a proposal who came from the embassy, and we are very happy to welcome you, especially we consider Woodrow Wilson is a very special political actor for Romania and for us as a school of government. In fact, we hadn't had the chance to speak a little bit in my office, but the Senate, led by President Judd Bankert, decided a couple of months ago to name our library Woodrow Wilson Library. So, Mr. President, the floor is yours. And I have a list of 100 questions, but I'll see if I have the chance.
Thank you. Speaking of fake news, I have never read an article about myself in which I have recognized myself. And I have come to have the impression that I must be some kind of a fraud, because I think a great many of these articles have been written in absolute good faith. I tremble to think of the variety and the falseness of the impressions I make, that I am a cold and removed person with a thinking machine inside, which he never allows to be moved by any winds of affection or emotion. It turns like a cold searchlight on whatever is presented to his attention. If I were to describe myself, I would say that it is my constant embarrassment to control the emotions that are inside of me. You may not believe it, but I sometimes feel like a far from extinct volcano. And if you do not see the lava spilling over, it's because you are not high enough to see the cauldron boil. If I seem circumspect, it is because I am so diligently trying not to make any colossal blunders. If you just calculate the number of blunders a man can make in 24 hours, if he does not listen more than he talks, you would have a sense of the feeling I have. I am listening. I am trying to collect all the brains that are borrowable so that I will not make any more blunders than it is inevitable that a man with limited knowledge and capacities is bound to make. And the pressure of the thing is so much that I must wear a mask to conceal it. I actually sometimes feel like I am masquerading when I read about myself in some printed description. But I will try to be honest and open with you today, and I must admit, as I was riding here today, coming to speak with you, I was filled with warm emotion. You see, you may only think of me as a president of the United States, but I had a career before I went into politics, one that gave me great satisfaction. I was a professor. I taught and wrote about the law, history, economics, and government. And then I was given the privilege of serving as the president of the very university from which I, as a young man, had graduated. Those were the happiest days of my life. So you can imagine how heartening it is for me to come to be here with you today in this place where reason is the gospel and truth is valued above all else. I have often said that the job of the university is to make young men and women as unlike their parents as possible. Now, I say that without any disrespect for their mothers and fathers, but anyone who is old enough to have a child who is at the university is old enough to have become seriously immersed in some particular business, and almost certainly to have caught the point of view of that business. And it is very useful to conduct their children to some higher place where they can see the general map of the world and the interest of mankind, and there be shown how big the world really is and how much of it their parents may have forgotten. I was very fortunate. My father was a Presbyterian minister, and my mother had been the daughter of a Presbyterian minister. As I was growing up, I saw my father move men with his words, move their very souls. As long as I can remember, I have wanted to inspire others as he could. But I have never been fond of thinking of Christianity in terms of saving individual souls. And I've always been very impatient with organizations and institutions that say that their purpose is to put every man in the way of developing his character. My advice is, don't think about your character. If you think about what you ought to do for other people, your character will take care of itself. Character is a byproduct. I believe that the only religion that is worth anything is the weekday religion. The religion that penetrates into your business, and the motive that must survive is the motive that prompts you in the conduct of your private principles. That which motivates you while you're seeking your own welfare to think of your neighbors and what will be to the benefit of the community as a whole. Not too long ago, I had the stark experience of hearing a man who had not often spoken outside of university circles. And a group of men who had never been to the university expressed what I think might be the popular view. And they said that man, one man said to the other, that man has got brains. And the other man said, yes, he has brains to burn. And the first man says, you know what gravels me is that a man with that much brains would waste 20 years hanging around a university. Well, I spent almost 30 years hanging around a university before I went into politics. Now, some people have asked me what took me to leave the academic life and to go into politics. Well, I felt that it was a matter of service, and I wanted to help my fellow men, and I felt that the best way for me to do that was by serving in public office. Now, one of the questions that I'm often asked is, what do I think differentiates one country from another? Well, I think one country is differentiated by another country by its ideals, not by its possessions, by what it believes in, by what it acts upon, by what it intends, by the visions its young men and women dream, and the achievements its men and women of maturity attempt. So, what differentiates a man and a country? What differentiates America? What does America believe in? America believes in democracy. The right of those who submit to authority to have a voice in their own government. Are the rights and liberties of small nations in a universal dominion of right by such a concert of free peoples as shall bring peace and safety to all nations and make the world itself at last free. Now, you may have heard that America is a wealthy nation. And you may say that what differentiates America is its prosperity. but I would have to point out to you that these are two different things. Prosperity does not exist unless it is pervasive. The amount of wealth a nation has is far less important than the accessibility of that wealth. The more people you make it accessible to, the more energy you set free. Until, if you carry the process far enough, you almost have the zest of a creative act. And a nation will rise up under your wand and rise up and create things which the minds of men have not yet conceived. And this is because of a universal hope and of nothing else. You may hear some men in my country speak of America first. My urgent advice to them is to, yes, always think first of America, but always also think first of humanity. You do not love humanity if you seek to divide humanity into jealous camps. Humanity can only be welded together by love, by sympathy, by justice, not by jealousy and hatred. I am sorry for the man who seeks to make personal capital out of the passions of his fellow men. He has lost the touch and ideal of America. For America was created to unite mankind by the passions that lift, not by the passions that separate and debase. We all had come to America, either ourselves or in the persons of our ancestors, to better the ideals of men, to make them see something finer than they had seen before, to get rid of the things that divide and make sure of the things that unite. It was no doubt an historical accident that our great country was called the United States. But I, for one, am very grateful it has that word united in its title. And any man who seeks to divide man from man, group from group, interest from interest in that great country is striking at its very heart. Now, I am here very close to a great centennial. Less than a month, a little over a month from now, will be the culmination, the 100th anniversary of the culmination of the end of a great war. We're on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. The guns fell silent. The German authorities, who had, at the invitation of the Supreme War Council, been in communication with Marshal Falk, had accepted and signed the terms of armistice which he had been authorized and instructed to communicate to them. The war thus came to an end, for having accepted these terms of armistice, it would be impossible for the German command to resume it. It was not then possible to assess the consequences of this great consummation. We knew only that this tragic war, whose consuming flames had swept from one nation to another, was at an end, and that it had been the privilege of our own people to enter it at its most critical junction in such fashion and in such force as to contribute in a way of which we were all deeply proud of the great result. We knew also that the object of the war had been obtained, the object upon which all free men had set their hearts, and attained with a sweeping completeness which even then we did not realize. Armed imperialism, which the men conceived who had been but yesterday the masters of Germany, was at an end. Its illicit ambitions engulfed in black disaster. Who would seek to revive it? The arbitrary power of the military caste of Germany, which once could secretly and of its own single choice disturb the peace of the world, had been discredited and destroyed. But more than that, much more than that had been accomplished. The great nations which had united themselves to destroy it were definitely joined in the common intent of setting up such a peace as would satisfy the longing of the whole world for disinterested justice, embodied in settlements that were based on something much better and much more lasting than the selfish competitive interests of powerful states. The people who were just coming out from the yoke of arbitrary government and were coming at last into the freedom would never find the treasures of liberty they were in search of if they looked for them by the light of the torch. They would find that every pathway that was stained with the blood of their own brothers leads to the wilderness, not to the city of home. We would hold the light steady until they found themselves, and in the meantime, if it was possible, we would set up such a peace as would justly define their place among the nations, remove all fear of their neighbors and their former masters, and allow them to live in peace and content once they had set their own affairs in order. To conquer with arms is to make only a temporary conquest. To conquer the world by earning its esteem is to make permanent conquest. I was convinced that the nations of the world would learn the discipline of freedom and now settle into its orderly practice. And we're about to make conquest of the world with sheer power, example of friendly helpfulness. As may be the case now, was then, the present situation in the world of affairs afforded America the opportunity to render an invaluable service to mankind by proving that there was at least one great and powerful nation that could put self-interest away and devote itself to establishing and practicing the highest ideals of disinterested service and consistent maintenance of exalted standards of conscience and the right. The only way that we could then and now give proof of our appreciation of the sacrifice those men who died in France had made is if we resolve to put self-interest away and once again formulate and act upon the highest ideals of disinterested service and consistent maintenance of high principles of international policy. I sometimes wonder, even now, why some men take our flag and flaunt it. If you are respected, you do not have to demand respect. If you are feared, you do not have to ask for fear. If your power is known, you don't have to proclaim it. I do not understand the temper, and many in my country do not understand the temper who use our flag boastfully. But I hope that in the near future, we, with our friends in Romania, can help ensure that peace is maintained in the world. It will only be through our efforts to work together. For no nation, even a nation as great as the United States, can stand alone and write a singular history of mankind. It requires the help of all, the help of great nations and of smaller nations, together, sharing mutual respect and trust. Thank you for your time, and I wonder if any of you have any questions. No? Okay, I'm ready. Correct.
In a context which was not towards the idea of United States joining the European War. How you arrived to this decision? What were the main enemies, let's say, enemies in the US politics? And so how can you describe the context around that day?
I think we may only have time for one question. Six months after the war began, after Austria-Hungary had attacked Serbia, which resulted in Russia mobilizing her forces on the Austro-Hungarian border, which proceeded with Germany declaring war on Russia, and France mobilizing her forces, and England, after Belgium was attacked, joining the war. 6 months after that, Germany declared the waters around the British Isles and off the coast of France to be a war zone, in which any ship, neutral or military, commercial or belligerent, who entered those waters would be subject to attack by their submarine without warning. We protested that the very nature of the submarine and this method of attack was a violation of all the principles of humanity, the rights, long-established rights of neutrals, and the sacred immunity of non-combatants. That Germany was violating what had been understood for over 200 years as the rights of non-belligerents. That ships should not be fired upon unless they refused to stop and be boarded. And if they were flying the flag of a neutral vessel, once any contraband that was found was removed, they must be led upon their way. Now, over the next year, Germany would, in fact, sink great passenger liners, the Lusitania and the Arabic, and scores of other commercial ships. And the toll of Americans who died on ships so attacked and sunk would grow month by month into the hundreds. Till finally, after almost a year of communiques, I advised the German government that if they continued their relentless and indiscriminate submarine warfare, we would have to break diplomatic relations with Germany, and also ensure the return of the lost territories of Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico as part of any peace settlement Germany made with America. And when confronted with this, the Foreign Secretary Zimmerman boldly and publicly acknowledged the plot. It had become clear that the Germans were determined to prosecute the war to its end until one or the other of the belligerents was vanquished. I had always believed that the hope for a just and lasting peace was a peace between equals, a peace without victory, but it had become clear that that was no longer possible. And we could not allow the democracies of Europe to be the vanquished in this war. And I knew that unless America entered it at that point, we would not have a place at the peace table. And 10 months later, a few months later, I would announce the 14 points, which we hoped then would become part of any final peace treaty. So I know that's a long, roundabout way to perhaps answer your question, but it was accumulation of almost 2.5 years of trying to remain neutral. And when it was finally realized that Germany was determined to prosecute this war until it had vanquished its enemies, it appeared. And the actions by Germany had also created a sentiment within the country that America was prepared to make the sacrifices that would be necessary. One of the things that we instituted then, which was quite interesting, we had what were called 5-minute men.
Exactly.
And there were hundreds of thousands of these individuals who would learn a speech that would last for 5 minutes. And oftentimes they would stand up before a movie would be played or before another public speaker. And through that, we were able to disseminate a great deal of information to people. The ability, I think, in that effort to mobilize people through the use of posters and 5-minute men and short films and other things are very powerful. And men like Herbert Hoover, who were able to convince the American people of the necessity of conserving food so that there would be surplus to ship to Europe. Because, of course, during the war, the farm productions in northern France and Belgium were horribly disrupted. So I remember what Lippmann produced, but not necessarily him.
So you're credited to be the founding father of the League of Nations, but then the U.S. Congress did not endorse it after it was created. And I was wondering if you can, in retrospect, think, what was your failure in not convincing the U.S. Congress? Was it their jealousy because you spent much time in Paris after the war instead of staying a bit more in the United States and engaging with them? Or was it something else? So it's important to know retrospect.
Yeah. Well, this is another complicated question. In 1918, in November, just days before the armistice was announced, there was a congressional election. And in it, the Republican Party, I was the head of the Democratic Party, won a majority in both the House and the Senate. And the new Senate Majority Leader, a gentleman by the name of Henry Cabot Lodge from Massachusetts, was also the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, the committee that was responsible for ratifying the treaty. And Mr. Lodge was attributed with saying after the election that I might have won the war, but they would win the peace. And the treaty, which never should have been a partisan issue, soon became one. And the focus of their attack was upon the League. Now, in America, for a treaty to be accepted and then ratified requires 2/3 of the approval of the Senate. There was a group that represented more than 1/3 that were referred to as the revisionists. They were willing to join in the League if we would make some changes. Now, in the final analysis, the peace in any society is maintained by force. And if you were to say there will be no more war, you have to have force to give that shell life.